Hey, it's Chris, Liege Games. So, a while back, when I was on Kickstarter, Limbo 1.5 launched on Kickstarter. And I was talking about it in my weekly roundup, and they actually reached out to me and they said, hey, would you like to play a copy? And so I said, sure, why not? And they sent me a copy. Actually, and let me be very clear, a backer, a previous backer from their first campaign, sent me their own personal copy. Andy, kudos to you for being willing to do that so that I could play around with it, get a good sense of it, and talk to you guys about it. So that's what I did. I want to give you a few thoughts on it. Their campaign pledge manager is going to be opening up soon for the 1.5 version of their latest Kickstarter. So let's talk a little bit whether or not Limbo War Eternal is a skirmish game for you and how it compares, and my thoughts, my concerns, my pros, my cons on it from that side of things. Let's talk. So let's go into the little bit of background from Limbo Miniatures. This is the original campaign, 342,000 Australian dollars, just over 1,800 backers, finished funding near the end of 2018. Skirmish miniature war game where you're creating your own army using deck construction from a faction in order to beat your opponent with variable objectives and variable win conditions. And so you can get a little bit of a feel of the aesthetic here and how it's going to work, and a little bit of what it looks like and the core gameplay experience and the core boxes and things like that. So let's go over to the 1.5 page because this is really what we're talking about here. Now, it raised more this time, 375,000 with 1,400 instead of 1,800. So a little bit higher price per pledge. Solo adventure, 1 to 4 players, 60 to 90 minutes. Okay, sure. So here is the basic gist of what they've got here. Some stretch goals and all the other stuff. And so a little bit of everything you need to know about the game itself, what you're going to be in the starter set, the 2 factions of the angels and the demons, and the lords, heroes, and troops, because there are 3 different levels in which you're drafting from that you have to have within each army. And then, it's one of those skirmish games where you put out a set amount for each person. Like, we're going to choose 50 shards in this case, and you need to choose in a combination of troops, lords, and heroes, like I just said, that equals less than 50 as much as possible. Again, solo mode, exclusives, accessories, stretch goals, new faction here of Saga of Nodin, some more stretch goals. Okay, so this is, it's a skirmish game, right? Miniature-based skirmish game. A little bit of everything else, even a werewolf. Now, it has right here the 1.5 rulebook draft, and I'm going to talk about that first because there's also the 1.0 rulebook. First and foremost, and this is the biggest downside of this game, this 1.0 rulebook is not good. It's not good at all. The copy of the 1.0 rulebook was included in the copy that was sent to me. It's not a good rulebook. There's a lot of stuff missing. There's a lot of stuff that is without explanation. There is just not a good sequence of how to play, how to set up. The minutia especially is not there, especially for a game that is as highly tactical and in such significant combinations where you can get lots of exceptions. It feels like there needs to be more. This is one where you get someone whose sole job outside of the company even, and I think they've got somebody working on rules now, just to make this better, because the rule book is the first impression when people play a game like this, or when people bring a game like this to game night. I'm one of those people that brings the rule book to game night, and I'll read through it and I'll get the sense of it and I'll explain it to other people. But if I'm having that much trouble, well, that's a big turnoff. If I can't get the game played and I'm the one that's the most interested in it in the first place. And especially if I'm going to pay this much money for miniatures, I'm expecting the rulebook to be well done from that side of things. So that is the biggest sore spot right from the get-go that you need to know. Now, can you learn it? Absolutely. Is it very easy though? It's not as easy as it should be. It's just not. So what's something that's good about it? The miniatures are fine. The miniatures are fine from that side of things. You're going to get better than average miniatures. The abilities that these heroes, lords, and tactical units have, they're great. They're great. There is a great set of imagination that has gone into making these very maneuverable, very different, very usable in different combinations that would make it a lot of fun. Now, the problem, though, is because it's a deck construction, this is not going to be everyone's ilk. This is not going to be as easy. And because it's a deck construction, because you have such unique abilities and such varying things, and so many of them potentially between the 3-4 different units that you have on the board at any one time, the abilities that they all have, the upgrades and the enhancements that you're going to be able to use, or the spells. So there's a lot potentially going on in terms of moving parts that can be a little bit overwhelming at the same time. And so if you're someone that is going to have concerns about that or trouble with that, this game might be a little bit much for you. It's a little bit of a higher learning curve on that side of things. And keeping track of all of it can be a little bit not the easiest. And it can be a little bit of outside. It can be outside of a little bit of, and it can be a little outside of people's comfort zones who aren't used to doing that. It's a lot for my wife to be able to do. She, struggled with that as someone that is not as deep in the hobby, but has still played a fair number of games. And, let's talk about deck construction here. There are plenty of options. There are plenty of all these guys, all the expansions, all the different faction iterations. So there's plenty of stuff from that side of things. And let's talk about this map, because this map is probably the other biggest thing that I had a trouble with as the 1.0 version. One, the map wasn't big enough. You have these massive miniatures that are nearly a third of the width of the board. One, that doesn't leave a whole lot of room for maneuverability, no matter what their speed is, how fast or slow. And then the second point was the boards themselves were just not well defined. You can see even on this page right here, with this picture, they seem much more well defined in terms of the terrain, in terms of the obstacles. Because that was the other thing with some of these larger miniatures, the heroes and the lords, you couldn't maneuver them not because the board wasn't big enough, but because the terrain was right there and you just couldn't get around them that well. And if you can't maneuver a whole lot, and maneuverability doesn't matter, especially when you're including things like flanking in the game, which again is a very good aspect, it becomes more of a moot point. If I can't utilize and bear the full abilities of these people in the first place, it sort of renders the excitement much more dull, a little bit more muted. This was the big thing to get this upgraded as well, to give much more of a tactical 3D skirmish element. It reminded me a little bit too much of Gatefall, if you will, without the simplicity of Gatefall, where Gatefall was just, hey, take these guys, here's their deck, and do stuff with them and go. Gatefall was a little bit of a slugfest. I mean, it was basically walk up to the other person and attack and see who could slightly outmaneuver the other person more. I mean, it was fine, but it was, a quarter of the price too. And the miniatures were just as on par in smaller quantities. So that's where it needs to stand out. And the question is 1.5 going to do that? Because, it appears that they're addressing those two concerns. But the question is, what is the final product going to look like? The miniatures aren't going to be my concern. You can see the miniatures, especially painted, they turn out beautiful. And that was not me, let's be clear. I did not do that. They came sent to me that way with some of those pre-painted. And when I see all of these other expansions here, for example, this miniature is freaking cool looking. But how many of these do I need if I'm only playing, as it says, with potentially one hero, one lord each time? Well, you're giving me, 6 hero miniatures there. I can only really play with probably 1, maybe 2 at a time, depending on what my, total count is for what side or what size of game we're doing. And that's fine. But do I need, 20 heroes, 25 heroes on a faction side if I'm only going to be, using 1 or 2 at most per game? Because this game is also one that I would dare say evolves from a meta standpoint of getting to know the combos that you can make out of these. And if you have 25, it's going to be awful hard to figure them all out because the sheer variety is going to be almost overwhelming in the complexity. Not because they're each individually complex, but because you're trying to figure out, well, is there one out there that's better? And I just haven't looked at, 12 of the 25 because I just also don't have that much time to sit there and do it because I'd rather be playing as well. Again, just something to think about when you've got all of these add-ons, because there's a lot of cool stuff here. Like I said, the abilities on these guys are by far the highest point of this game. There is some cool stuff that they are doing. The disadvantage, advantage, scheming of things and how you attack, not like D&D disadvantage and advantage, but okay, you're getting this much extra added to your attack or subtracted from your attack based on the difference from those two things is unique. It's done in a well way. The damage system, it's a little bit mathy in terms of, you got to divide this by this and get this, but it's fine. It's nothing difficult that one person couldn't easily figure out for both of you. So then the question with Limbo Eternal War, especially with the 1.5 edition now, is it right for you? Again, this is one of the more unique ability-driven tactical nature games that I have seen. But the question I think remains, based on the 1.0 version that I have and the 1.5 version that we were just looking at, is can it address those holes and those criticisms that make it, kind of an okay game? And that can make it a really wow, this is one of the better skirmish games that I've played. And again, I'm not saying that I don't think they can, but I think there need to be some significant improvements in the 1 to 1.5 game from mainly those areas that I was just talking about, because those are going to be holdups for other people too. What also this needs to have is it needs to have a nice, easy flow sheet. It needs to have player aids, player references. Those are a must in a game like this when you have so much skirmish that there's nuance and turns and how they're doing things. Something just a little concrete, even if it seems overly simplistic. Also, what would be nice would be some recommended combos. So if I am, Joe Schmo, and I bring this to somebody else's house, because that's ultimately what people do, or someone's coming to my house, let's be honest, I'm not going to these boxes were very good sized, and they've never played a game like this before. You want your game to be a game that people can pick up and play relatively, not like super quick, but easily. And it would be really nice if you said, okay, you know what? If you've got this part of the game and this part of the game, we would recommend, here are a couple teams. If you've got this part of the game and this part of the game, or this, and this, or just this, here are some combinations of the heroes, lords, and troops that we would recommend based on the starting recommend shard amount for the total team of 40, I think they say now, in the 1.5 version of the rules. Just give me a couple. Give me 3 or 4 on each side, so that the person picking it up for the first time goes, oh, okay, I'll just take these, and oh, look at this. Oh, I think I can start to see what this guy would be able to do with this one and this one. So again, not like holding their hand the whole time, but giving them a good ground to stand on, so that then they can get their feet wet and say, you know what if I changed this troop out with this one to slightly, and then this lord with this one, just again to change how I'm approaching it, to get the gears turning and the balls moving from that side of things. I would love to see it on that as well, because that is the gateway essentially to the game. If the barrier to entry is too difficult, then I'm not going to want to get it out on my table in the first place. It's not going to get played. It's not going to get played. I'm not going to buy more than, and I might even try and get rid of it. And that's not what I want to do with a game like this. I want to get it played. I want to develop tactics. I want to develop a meta. I want to get repeated plays in. And it needs to be that way with 1.5. And if it does, we're talking it could be several notches higher. But it needs to address some of those things in terms of the miniatures, in terms of the size of those guys. The lords are cool, but, again, either make the lords smaller, because we always think of lords as like, but what if your lord was small? I mean, we see that every once in a while on typical bad guy shows with tropes. Like everyone's expecting the huge muscle bound, and then all of a sudden the little guy comes out and they're like, oh, you're just a little guy. And he's like, boom, and they go flying, right? I'd love to see that. The miniatures don't have to be massive if the powers make up for it. So don't lose sight of the nuance of the game and correlate powers with size. Doesn't have to be that way. It can be, and that's cool, but it's cool the other way too, occasionally. So there you go. Either way, I want to say thank you for the guys at Limbo of getting this sent to me, and that backer who was willing to lend me this game for that long. Hopefully, if you are a skirmish person, this was helpful in terms of what it provides and how it looks compared to some of the other skirmish type games out there. Questions? Let me know. As always, thanks for watching. Stay classy. I'll see you around.